Hello everybody, keys players of KXC. This is a tutorial video about how to use the Nord. I'm not going to go into loads of detail, I just want to give the overviews and I hope this is helpful. Be blessed. Okay, so when you fire up the Nord, anything could happen. So we need to understand the basics of what each of these kind of things do. Now it looks like there's loads of controls and knobs and stuff and it looks horribly scary, but once you understand the categories and what's actually going on, it's quite easy to get what you want quickly. So I've just opened this up and there's nothing's going on. Number one, and most importantly, this thing here is your master level. Check that that's up. Okay, still nothing. Next, this is the organ section, this is the piano section, this is the synth section. Those are the three main parts of this keyboard. Each section has a volume knob, so this thing here, and this thing here, and each section has an on-off button. So at the moment, all three of these sections, the organ, the piano, and the synth, they're off. So if I want to get a sound, I'm going to turn the piano on. So turn it on, now we've got something, and I can alter the volume of the piano individually here. Loud, quiet. Let's put the organ on. So here is the organ, a lovely organ sound. Now, again, I can control the volume, and then within this organ section, there are several different controls. That is beyond the scope of this video, as I'm sure you would be pleased. If you really want to get into the organ stuff, then have a look on YouTube. In worship at KXC, I think more often than not, it's better to use piano, maybe some synth. Organ, I guess, is kind of expert rating. So let's turn that off. Let's look at the piano. So, piano on. Now, the things that you really need to know here for the piano are this stuff here. So this is the control of which piano you're using. You keep pressing this info button and it cycles through the 6 different types of piano. You've got grand, upright, electric piano, etc. A great place to start is the upright. So at the moment it's on grand, it sounds like this. Lovely C chord. It will go to upright and now it sounds like this. Softer, more delicate, more beautiful, more worshipful, dare I say. Within each of these 6 types, there are at least 3 models. So kind of 3 subtypes. One sounds like this, bit brighter. Number 2 is called felt piano, and you can see that when you press this button, the name comes up here. That's felt, that sounds lovely. We use that quite a lot. And then number 4 is called mellow. And it's kind of maybe split the differences halfway between the 2. So I would recommend, if you just want a decent starting point, either use number 2, the felt, or number 4, the mellow. And remember, this is on the upright setting. What else do we need to talk about with the piano? Again, in your own time, work out what they do, but we're just thinking about the basics. So octave shift is also something that it would be really important to look at. So octave shift, if you press that down on the screen, it will say -1. So now everything's gone down an octave. If I go up, normal, then up again, and then it goes to +1. So now everything's shifted up an octave. So it's just worth bearing that in mind as well. If it feels like everything's really high, everything's really low, just check that this is set to 0. That's the piano section. Let's turn that off. Now let's think about the synth section. Now again, this looks really scary and I'm not going to go into loads of detail. I just want to look at the overviews of what might be useful. Press it on for it to actually do something. I've pressed it on but nothing's coming out. That's because my level of the synth is not up. So let me turn this up. A lovely synth sound. There's a few different controls on here, and when you recall a setting, you're recalling the individual settings of, say, the synth or the piano or the organ. And sometimes there might be a bit of a rogue button that's been pressed on here that's altering everything. So again, it's just helpful to know some of the basics. So let's just go through some of the basics here. The arpeggiator. This is something that if I hold down a note, an arpeggiator, what it does is it repeats that note in whatever pattern you choose. So again, if you've got that kind of weird effect going, let's turn the rate up here. It's really cool, but it's also quite confusing. And again, this is not going to be something we're using. So just make sure that button's off. The hold button's also worth thinking about. As you can see, the hold button means that if I press a note and release it, it just holds the note indefinitely. So again, you want to make sure that's not on. The octave shift we've already talked about, so that's again the same concept. LFO, don't worry too much about this for now. The key thing to look at is that you do need to understand about is this little window here. This is the oscillator. What that means is this is the selection, the choice of sound. And then the other one that we need to think about is the filter. I'll come on to that in a sec. So first, the choice of sound. At the moment, again, much like the piano over here, there's 6 different types of sound that you can choose. So let's just go through those. Okay, so they all sound like subtly different. What I would say for using the Nord at church is you want to go onto sample, because instead of shaping the sound ourselves, the sample means that you can load up a kind of any sound in the world and you play that sound when you hit the key. And what we've done is we've found a few different samples that are great, that sound kind of worshipful and nice. And we've loaded up some of our own as well. So let's hear, you can go through these different samples using this knob here. I don't know how many there are, 122 of them, so there's quite a lot. So let's go back to 114, which is where it was. Let's hear that. Now that sounds a bit horrible to me. I do know for a fact that 122 is like a relatively decent pad. Although again, you might think probably still sounds a little cutting. This is where we take ourselves onto the filter section. Again, there's lots of stuff that we're not going to go through here, but this knob here is really key. This is the frequency cutoff. It's best for me to demonstrate this. That's the sound when the frequency is all the way up to the top. And then as I reduce this knob, it's going to like cut off the top end, so it's going to become warmer and warmer. So listen to this. So somewhere around the middle is a really inoffensive sound. And especially if I turn up the overall volume, that's a pad sound that's really going to work. I guess if we get this frequency down to the middle or just below the middle, we've got ourselves what we would call a pad sound. Whereas if I put the frequency right up, so that all of the frequency is being played, we've got a different sound now. It's more of a synth lead sound. I should have practiced that one. That's the kind of thing you might use for a synth part. So let's get that frequency down there again. And this is where the magic happens. I've got a synth sound that I'm happy. Now let me put the piano on again. I've got a piano and a synth sound, and I can use these 2 volume knobs to blend exactly how I want those to be together. Now, at KXC, we've been encouraging keys players to not use a synth, to just use a piano, and then to have AutoPad on as well. This is really an attempt to make it so that people don't have to worry about this synth sound. And I would still implore you to do that. So just use AutoPad. You don't have to worry about the synth sound. The AutoPad is as it sounds, it's just automatic. You don't really have to worry about it. All you have to worry about is which key we're in. But if you want to challenge yourself and you start using the synth sound, then please do that. AutoPad is particularly helpful for getting out of one key and into another. So you might want to have a little practice about doing that with the synths instead. So say if we were going from C and we wanted to go into the key of E major, for example, then I might do something like this. Hold the C down, fade it out, start the E chord, and then bring that in. Now, I don't like how that sounds. That sounds too abrasive. So let's do that again. This time when I do the E chord, I'm going to do something like this. So if you notice, this time I'm just playing 2 notes, the root E and the B of the E major. It's like an E major power chord. And that sounds a little less offensive. So let's go from C again. So maybe a bit lower. Okay, fade it out and fade in the new key. And then as soon as I've faded that in, I could start to introduce a bit of piano as well. That kind of thing. Now, one of the reasons I like AutoPad is that you can get the pad going separately. You don't have to worry about that. And then over the top, you
can just tinkle around with the piano sound and it's not going to affect what notes the synths are playing. So just something to think about. I'd start with just piano and then AutoPad, but if you really want to challenge yourself, then you can start to use the synth sounds underneath the piano. Let's talk very quickly about the effects over here, and then finally we'll talk about presets. Effects. Over here, on the far right, are two things that are really useful to use. There's a compressor here. What a compressor does is it essentially makes the quieter notes that you play a bit louder. So this is without the compressor. Sounds lovely. If I do some really quiet notes like that, then they don't cut through as much. Press the compressor. If I play loudly, it sounds much the same. But if I play quietly, suddenly those notes are almost given a bit more confidence. In worship, playing keys, it's really helpful for everything we do to be quite deliberate. So I would say using the compressor is really important, just to make the sound a little bit more full and more solid. Then there's the reverb. Again, it's worth putting a bit of reverb on. It makes everything sound nicer, to be honest. I'm going to put the reverb on, so there's a few controls here. You have to press the on button. And then again, there's these 6 different levels, types of room for a reverb. Reverb is it's not echo, but it's kind of like how echoey a sound is. If you're in a big hall, it sounds very different to if you're in a small room. And then this knob here is the amount of reverb. So just to prove the point, I've put it in the hall and quite a lot of reverb, and it sounds like this. And you can hear that it's really kind of like echoey. That might be too much, but we could just take the reverb down a little bit, maybe somewhere in the middle. And I would put that on when you're playing. The last little bit of effects that I'm going to talk about, let me take the reverb off, let me leave the compressor on. I'd just love to talk about this thing here. Now, again, there's loads of scope for lots of different things. One thing I just want to talk about is the delay setting, which is this here. So it's got an on-off switch. So let me press on. Now, delay is actual echo. So I know that I was saying reverb is kind of like echoey. Delay is actual echo, so basically the repeat of a note. So if I play a note, there was a little bit of repeating of that note. It wasn't very obvious to hear. The rate tempo is how quickly something's repeated. So now you can hear, if I increase the amount so that the volume of the echo is increased. I'm also gonna use this feedback knob here. The feedback is the number of times the note is repeated. So I'm going to put that up there, and now when I press this note, you'll be able to hear it repeating several times. Now, that is a lot of delay, too much. But if I put the amount down a little bit, the feedback down a little bit, and I use the tap tempo, so I want, say, we're doing Cornerstone, something like that. So let me tap that. Dun, 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 dun. So when I'm playing, it kind of sounds similar, but if I just play an isolated note, it just adds a nice little bit of ambience and texture to your playing. So that's delay.